Imagine this. You have a big dream. You want to create something the world has never seen before. You believe in it so much that you're ready to risk everything, even if people laugh at you, even if the world tells you you're crazy, even if your own friends betray you. Most people give up. Most people run away. But not Walt Disney. He was fired for not being creative enough. He went bankrupt. He was betrayed, rejected, mocked, and left with nothing. But instead of stopping, he created Mickey Mouse. He built the Disney empire, and he turned dreams into a billion-dollar reality. This is not just a story of cartoons. This is a story about life, pain, imagination, and unbreakable belief. If you're struggling, if people don't believe in you, if your dreams feel too big, watch this story till the end. It will change the way you think. And here's the bonus. As you listen, you're not just getting inspired. You're also improving your English, naturally, emotionally, powerfully, because this story is told in simple English with real-life examples and every moment explained clearly. Perfect for all learners. Part 1. The Boy Who Lived Inside a Dream. Let's go back to the very beginning. Name: Walter Elias Disney. Born December 5th, 1901. Place: Chicago, Illinois, United States. Walt was the fourth child in a big family. His father, Elias Disney, was a strict man, hard-working but often angry. His mother, Flora, was warm, gentle, and believed in Walt's creativity. When Walt was just 4 years old, the family moved to a small farm in Marceline, Missouri. This little town changed Walt's life forever. Why? Because it was filled with trees, animals, trains, and quiet streets. Walt used to watch the trains go by and dream of distant places. He loved the world of imagination. From a very young age, Walt began drawing on anything he could find: paper, napkins, even walls. But they were not rich. In fact, they were very poor. So Walt didn't have fancy pencils or notebooks. Instead, he used charcoal sticks from the stove to draw on old newspaper. That's how the world's most magical empire started, with a boy drawing on trash paper. One day, a neighbor saw Walt's drawing of a horse and offered him 5 cents to draw one for her too. That was Walt's first money as an artist. Walt hated school. Why? Because it didn't allow him to imagine. It was boring, repetitive, and strict. He would often daydream, sketching funny characters in his books. His teachers scolded him. His father said drawing was useless. But Walt didn't stop. Walt's family was very poor. His father struggled to keep jobs. Walt and his brother Roy had to work even when they were children. At age 10, Walt delivered newspapers every morning at 4 a.m., even during the freezing winters of Missouri. He didn't have warm clothes. His hands would bleed from the cold. Sometimes he fainted from exhaustion at school, but he kept drawing. That was the only thing that made him feel alive. When World War I began, Walt wanted to serve, but he was too young to join the army. So he forged his birth certificate to say he was older and joined the Red Cross Ambulance Corps. At age 16, he was driving ambulances in France, far from home. Even there, surrounded by wounded soldiers in war, Walt decorated his ambulance with cartoons. He drew funny characters on the side to make the soldiers smile. This shows you who he truly was. Even in war, he wanted to bring joy to others. After the war, Walt returned to America and said, "Now I will become an artist." He started working at a commercial art studio in Kansas City, drawing ads for newspapers. But that job didn't last long. Walt had bigger dreams. He wanted to make moving cartoons, something people had never seen. He started his first company with a friend called Laughogram Studios. They created little fairy tale cartoons. People loved them, but Walt made a big mistake. He focused only on creativity, not on money. He gave away cartoons for free, trusted too many people, and didn't have a business plan. Soon, he was broke, alone, and sleeping in his office. He had just $40 left, no food, and no support. But instead of crying, he packed a small suitcase, borrowed $500, and took a train to Hollywood. He believed that his real story had just begun. Every great dream starts with the poor boy who refuses to stop dreaming. Walt didn't have money. He didn't have support, but he had a pencil, a dream, and the courage to keep going. Walt Disney stepped off the train in Hollywood with nothing but a small suitcase, a drawing pad, and a heart full of dreams. It was 1923. He was just 21 years old, had only $40 in his pocket, and knew no one. He had already failed once in Kansas City. He had lost his studio, his savings, his equipment, and his team. But what he didn't lose was his belief. Walt believed that the world needed something new, something more than black and white silent films. He wanted to create animated characters that people could fall in love with. Not just cartoons, but real emotions, real stories. Walt moved in with his Uncle Robert. He lived in a tiny room and paid $5 a week for rent. He had no office, no studio, no team. So he set up a camera in a garage and began creating a new cartoon character called Alice, a little girl who lived in a cartoon world. He sent the short film called Alice's Wonderland to a company in New York called Margaret Winkler Productions. To his surprise, they loved it and offered him a contract. But here's the thing. Walt needed help. He couldn't do this alone. Walt called his older brother Roy, who was recovering from tuberculosis in a veterans hospital. Roy believed in Walt. He always had. So even though he was sick and had no money, Roy said, "Let's do it together, Walt." That's how they formed the Disney Brothers Studio, the company that would later become the Walt Disney Company. They set up their tiny studio in a back office at 4651 Kingswell Avenue, Los Angeles. The rent was $10 a month. They worked day and night, sleeping very little, hand-drawing every single frame. Alice became a small success. Not big money, but enough to survive. Walt felt hopeful again. But destiny had another test waiting. In 1927, Walt wanted to create a new character, something fun, happy, and full of energy. That's how Oswald the Lucky Rabbit was born. Oswald had big ears, long legs, and a funny smile. He quickly became very popular. Audiences loved him. But Walt had made one big mistake. He didn't own Oswald. The rights were held by the distributor, Universal Pictures. In 1928, Walt traveled to New York to negotiate a higher budget for Oswald. He was excited. He thought he was about to grow his business. But when he entered the office, he was stabbed with words he never expected. The executive said, "Walt, we've hired most of your animators behind your back. You no longer own Oswald. We do. If you want to keep working, you'll work for us, as our employee." Walt was shocked. His own team, people he had trained and trusted, had been bribed and taken away by the company. He had lost everything again. No characters, no studio, no team, no money. He walked out of that building silent, with tears in his eyes. Most people would have given up right there. But Walt didn't. Walt boarded the train back to California. His heart was broken. His company was falling apart. His dreams were stolen. Again. But he didn't let that train ride become the end of his story. Instead, he let it be the beginning of something unforgettable. He sat down with a notebook and started drawing. He thought, "They stole my rabbit. I'll make a mouse, a happy mouse, a smart mouse, a mouse who never gives up, just like me." And there, on that train ride, Walt Disney created Mickey Mouse. Walt knew this time he had to protect his creation. He and Roy quickly filed copyrights for Mickey Mouse under Walt's name. No one could steal him now. But there was a problem. No one wanted to buy the cartoon. Mickey was too new, too different, and Walt had no money to promote him. He kept going anyway. They released a short cartoon called Plain Crazy, but no one noticed. Then came The Gallopin' Gaucho. Again, very little attention. Walt was running out of time and money. So he took a risk. He added something no cartoon had ever done before: sound. In 1928, Walt released Steamboat Willie, the first ever cartoon with synchronized sound. It wasn't just sound effects. The characters spoke. They laughed, whistled, and sang. Audiences were blown away. No one had ever seen anything like it. People lined up around the block to watch this funny little mouse on a steamboat. Mickey Mouse became an instant superstar. Just like that, Walt Disney, the man who had lost everything twice, was back on top. Walt began creating more Mickey Mouse cartoons. They were distributed to theaters and shown before movies. Each short film brought in thousands of dollars. Walt and Roy finally had profit. They hired more animators, bought better equipment, and opened a proper studio on Hyperion Avenue in Los Angeles. But Walt wasn't satisfied. He didn't want to just make cartoons. He wanted to build a world, a place where imagination had no limits. When everything was taken from him, even his own creation, Walt didn't cry, complain, or quit. He went back to the drawing board and created something better. They stole his rabbit. He gave the world a mouse. And that mouse became a legend. This part of Walt's story is not just about cartoons. It's about how to fight back after betrayal, how to protect your dream, and how to create something unforgettable when you're broken. Part 2. The Mouse Who Conquered the World. And a Dream That Nearly Killed Him. After the world fell in love with Mickey Mouse through Steamboat Willie, Walt Disney was finally climbing out of darkness. The betrayal of Oswald still hurt. But now, Walt had something he truly owned. Mickey Mouse wasn't just a character. He was a symbol of survival. A little mouse with a big heart. And Walt wasn't just drawing cartoons anymore. He was quietly building an empire. With the money from Mickey Mouse cartoons, Walt and Roy bought a new office on Hyperion Avenue in Los Angeles. It was small at first. Just a few rooms, a few desks, and a small team. But Walt treated it like the beginning of a kingdom. He hired more animators. He pushed them to be better, to do things no one had ever done. He wasn't focused on short-term success. He was obsessed with what could be possible. And that's when he started dreaming of something much bigger. Walt didn't stop at Mickey. He gave Mickey a girlfriend, Minnie Mouse, and she quickly became loved by fans all around the world. Then came more characters. Goofy, the silly dog who was always clumsy. Pluto, Mickey's loyal pet. Donald Duck, the angry, funny duck with a loud voice. Each one became iconic. But here's something most people don't know. Walt Disney voiced Mickey Mouse himself in the early years. Yes, that cheerful, squeaky voice, that was Walt's own voice. He wasn't just the creator. He was Mickey. As Mickey's popularity exploded, Walt and Roy began licensing the character. They started with small things: pencils, lunchboxes, notebooks, and watches. Then came Mickey Mouse dolls, books, posters, even clocks and toys. Soon, Mickey Mouse merchandise was earning over $1 million a year, which was a massive amount of money in the 1930s. That's over $20 million today. But Walt didn't care much about the money. He didn't buy big houses or expensive clothes. He reinvested almost everything back into the studio. Why? Because Walt had a new dream. A dream that everyone thought was impossible. In the early 1930s, Walt began talking about making the first full-length animated feature film. No one had ever done it before. Movies at that time were live action, real people, real sets. Cartoons were just short, funny clips, usually 5 to 7 minutes long. When Walt told people he wanted to make a 90-minute animated movie, people in Hollywood laughed. They called it Disney's Folly. Even Roy and his wife Lillian Disney were worried. Why? Because it was going to cost more than $250,000. And that was just the early estimate. For comparison, most animated shorts cost under $20,000. But Walt didn't care. He said, "This is going to change the world. People will sit down and cry over a cartoon." No one believed him, but he moved forward anyway. Walt chose Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs as the story for his film. It was a classic fairy tale, with love, danger, magic, sadness, and hope. But turning it into a cartoon wasn't easy. Walt pushed his team to go beyond anything they'd done before. New techniques in animation: depth, shadows, motion. Detailed character expressions, full orchestral music score, hand-painted backgrounds, over 2 million individual drawings. The budget quickly grew from $250,000 to $1.5 million. Walt had to mortgage his house and borrow money from banks. The stress nearly broke him. He lost weight. He couldn't sleep. He started having nervous breakdowns. People around him were terrified. If Snow White failed, the entire studio would shut down. Everyone would lose their jobs. Walt would lose everything. But he didn't slow down. He said, "This is not a cartoon. This is a story about the human heart." The premiere of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs took place at the Carthay Circle Theater in Los Angeles. The audience was full of celebrities, critics, filmmakers, all curious, some still mocking the idea. But as the movie played, the theater went silent. People started crying during the sad scenes. They laughed, they gasped, they cheered. At the end, they gave Walt Disney a standing ovation. Many had tears in their eyes. A cartoon had made grown men cry. A cartoon had told a real story, with emotion, pain, love, and joy. The impossible had happened. Snow White was a massive box office hit. It earned over $8 million. In the middle of the Great Depression. That's more than $160 million today. It became the highest-grossing sound film at that time. Walt paid back every loan. He gave bonuses to his team. He bought new land and began building a bigger studio in Burbank, California. But most importantly, he proved that animation was not just for kids. It was an art form. In 1939, Walt was given a special Oscar for Snow White. 1 full-size Oscar and 7 miniature ones representing the dwarfs. But he didn't stop there. He began planning his next animated films: Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo, Bambi. Each one more creative and emotional than the last. He was no longer just a cartoonist. He was a storyteller, a world builder, a visionary. Walt Disney believed in something no one had ever seen. He risked everything: his money, his health, his reputation, to tell a story that people said would never work. But he didn't just prove them wrong. He changed the future of movies. He turned drawings into dreams. He made the world cry, laugh, and believe with a pencil. By the end of 1937, Walt Disney had accomplished the impossible. He turned a cartoon mouse into a worldwide symbol. He created the world's first animated feature film and made the world cry. He proved that animation could be as powerful as any Hollywood movie. His studio was growing. His films were being translated into multiple languages, and his name was now not just known in America, but respected around the world. But just when everything seemed perfect, dark clouds appeared again. Walt used the profits from Snow White to build a state-of-the-art studio in Burbank, California. It was unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. Spacious animation rooms, natural light for artists, a special camera department, private screening rooms, even a cafeteria for staff. This wasn't just a building, it was a creative kingdom. But Walt's vision came with a price. The construction alone cost over $3 million, a massive amount in the 1930s. And while the studio looked like paradise, financial pressure was building behind the scenes. After Snow White, Walt immediately began working on several new animated films. 1. Pinocchio, 1940, a wooden puppet who wants to become a real boy. Second Fantasia, 1940, a blend of classical music and animation, including Mickey as the sorcerer's apprentice. Third Dumbo, 1941, a baby elephant with giant ears who learns to fly. 4. Bambi, 1942, a deer's emotional journey from childhood to adulthood. These films were incredible. Today, they are legends. But back then, things went wrong. When Pinocchio and Fantasia were released, something terrible happened. World War II had just started. As war spread across Europe, many international markets shut down. That meant fewer theaters, lower ticket sales, and millions of dollars lost. The studio had borrowed heavily to fund these films. Now, the company was struggling to survive again. Walt was devastated. These were his best creations, but the world was too busy fighting to watch cartoons. He refused to blame the world. Instead, he worked harder. But soon, he was about to face one of the darkest moments of his life. Not from outside, but from inside his own studio. Walt always saw himself as a leader, not a boss. He thought his studio was like a family. He believed he treated his artists well. But not everyone felt the same. Some animators were paid much more than others. Some worked long hours without fair recognition. And during the financial crash, Walt had cut salaries, but not his own. Tensions started to grow quietly. Then, on May 29, 1941, more than 300 Disney employees walked out of the studio. They were holding signs that said, "Disney unfair. Mouse is a rat. Don't smile with Mickey." Walt was crushed. He had spent years building something magical. Now he was being called a monster by the very people he gave jobs to. The strike went on for weeks. Walt was under pressure from newspapers, studios, investors, and even the U.S. government to settle the conflict. He was also emotionally breaking. This was not just about business. For Walt, This was personal. He felt betrayed, misunderstood, and deeply alone. So his doctor, and even his wife Lillian, told him to step away. He needed distance. That's when Walt accepted a government invitation to travel abroad as a goodwill ambassador to Latin America. He left the company in Roy's hands. For the first time in years, Walt Disney stepped away from the studio he built. During World War II, the Disney studio stopped most of its feature film work. Instead, they made military training films, war propaganda cartoons, and public safety animations. Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and Goofy were shown in army uniforms. These cartoons weren't about fun. They were about helping soldiers and educating the public. The U.S. government paid Disney to make these films, which helped the studio survive financially during the war. Walt didn't enjoy it, but he did it because he believed in supporting the country. And he knew. To dream again, first we must survive. Even while his studio was doing war work, even while he was recovering from betrayal, Walt was thinking about something completely new. He had noticed something during his travels, and even while visiting small amusement parks with his daughters, Diane and Sharon. He hated how dirty, cheap, and boring they were. He thought, what if there was a place where families could go together, where dreams felt real, where stories came to life? An amusement park, but like nothing anyone had ever seen. A place where people didn't just watch the magic. They lived inside it. That idea began to grow quietly inside him, while the world saw Mickey, Pluto, and Goofy on screen. Walt was secretly sketching castles, rides, worlds, and lands on napkins and notepads. People thought he was just recovering from stress. But what he was really doing was building the future. Walt Disney survived global war, financial collapse, and personal betrayal. He lost his team. He lost his peace. He lost his spark. But instead of giving up, he started imagining a world no one had ever seen. When people expected him to retire, he began dreaming harder than ever. Because that's who Walt was. When his world broke, he created a new one. Part 3. The Crazy Dream of Disneyland, and how he built the happiest place on Earth. While the world thought Walt Disney was just making more cartoons, while newspapers said he was past his prime, while investors still doubted him, Walt Disney was secretly building something much, much bigger than a film. He was designing an entire world. Not a fantasy world on paper. A real place. A place people could walk into. A place where stories would come alive around you. A place that would make children smile, adults dream again, and the impossible feel real. That place would be called Disneyland. But it started with nothing. No land, no support, no money, just an idea. And a man who refused to let it go. It all began with a simple moment. Walt Disney was sitting on a park bench in Griffith Park, Los Angeles, in the 1940s. He was watching his two daughters, Diane and Sharon, ride a small merry-go-round. He smiled. They laughed. But inside, he felt something was missing. I sat there, Walt later said, eating peanuts, watching my kids have fun, and I thought, there should be a place where parents and children can enjoy together. Most amusement parks at the time were dirty, unsafe, and meant only for kids. Walt didn't like the noise, the mess, or the cheap rides. That's when a wild, beautiful thought entered his mind. What if I build my own park? A clean place, a beautiful place, a place where imagination walks beside you. That moment was the birth of Disneyland. Back at his studio, Walt began drawing. Castles, main streets, mountains, lands, boats, trains. A giant sleeping beauty castle in the center. He called it Mickey Mouse Park at first. He worked late at night after finishing animation meetings. He didn't tell many people, not even his closest team, because he knew what they'd say. "Walt, this is too big. This is too crazy. This will never work." But Walt didn't care. He once said, "If you can dream it, you can do it." Now, he was going to prove it again. Walt needed money, a lot of it. Building an amusement park wasn't like making a movie. This wasn't paper and pencils. This was land, cement, steel, rides, water systems, electricity, parking, and thousands of employees. The cost would be over $17 million. In the 1950s. That's equal to more than $190 million today. Walt tried to get bank loans. They said no. He asked investors. They laughed. Even Roy Disney, his own brother, told him this was financial suicide. But Walt didn't stop. He said, "I'm not asking for permission. I'm building the future." So he made a dangerous decision. Walt Disney made a brilliant deal with ABC, a television network that needed new content. He said, "I'll make you a weekly TV show. You help fund my theme park." ABC agreed. They invested $500,000 in Disneyland and gave Walt a 1-hour weekly slot on national TV. Walt used that show, called Disneyland, to promote the park before it was even built. Each week he shared cartoons, behind the scenes of animation, new characters, and previews of the park. Millions of Americans watched in excitement. No one had ever marketed a theme park on TV before it even existed. Walt was now raising money and building a fan base at the same time. He sold life insurance, mortgaged his home, borrowed money from friends, and risked everything he had built over 30 years. All for a dream. Walt chose a 160-acre piece of land in Anaheim, California. At the time, it was full of orange trees and farmland. People thought he was crazy. Anaheim was far from Los Angeles. There were no freeways, no hotels, no tourism. But Walt saw what no one else saw. One day, this will be the heart of joy. He bought the land for $879,000. Then construction began, and nothing was easy. Disneyland was built in just 1 year, between 1954 and 1955. But almost everything went wrong. Water pipes broke. Heat waves destroyed concrete. The castle roof caught fire once. Workers fell behind schedule. Rides broke during tests. Contractors quit halfway through. And Walt kept changing designs. Even after walls were built, the workers called it Walt's nightmare. But Walt kept walking the site every day in a hard hat, sweating under the sun, pointing, fixing, encouraging. One worker said, "You didn't want to disappoint Walt." Even when he was tired, his eyes were still dreaming. The big day arrived. More than 28,000 people showed up to Disneyland's opening day, even though they had only planned for 15,000. Counterfeit tickets were sold. Traffic was so bad, cars were stuck for 7 miles. Rides broke down, food ran out, bathrooms overflowed. High heels sank into the fresh asphalt because it was still hot. The media called it Black Sunday. Some said the park would fail within a year. But Walt said nothing. He simply fixed everything. Within weeks, the problems were solved. Within months, crowds kept growing. And within a year, more than 3.5 million people had visited Disneyland. Disneyland was a miracle. It had themed lands like Main Street, USA, a vision of Walt's childhood town. Adventureland, with jungle cruises and wild stories. Fantasyland, home of Peter Pan, Snow White, and Sleeping Beauty. Tomorrowland, a future of rockets, science, and space. Frontierland, cowboys, trains, and the Wild West. Every corner had music, detail, color, smells, characters, and magic. It was not just a park. It was a living dream. Walt said, "Disneyland will never be completed. It will continue to grow, as long as there is imagination left in the world." Walt Disney built a world, while everyone said he was crazy. He risked his company, his house, his savings, and his health. But in the middle of dirt and chaos, he saw a castle. And where others saw oranges, he planted imagination. Disneyland wasn't built with money, it was built with belief. Part 4. The Final Dream, and how Walt Disney built a world that never dies. Disneyland was a living dream, but Walt Disney was not done. In fact, just months after Disneyland opened, he had already started dreaming again. He had created movies. He had changed animation. He had built the first magical kingdom. But now, he wanted to create an entire city, a city of the future, clean, safe, organized, full of technology, parks, public transport, and opportunity. He called it EPCOT, the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. And he was ready to build it. Walt didn't want to just entertain people anymore. He wanted to improve the way they live. He looked at the problems of American cities in the 1960s. Traffic, pollution, crime, overcrowding. And he thought, we can do better. He imagined people living in beautiful homes, safe and fast transportation with monorails and people movers, a central dome city filled with community, innovation, and education. No cars in neighborhoods, only walking paths and trains. A place where technology and humanity grow together. Walt said, "Epcot will always be in a state of becoming. It will never be completed, but it will always show the world what can be." He bought 27,000 acres of land in Florida. Yes, 27,000, which is twice the size of Manhattan. But very few people knew what he was doing. He bought the land in secret, using fake company names to keep the price low. When news broke, people were shocked. Walt Disney is building something in Florida. But what exactly? Walt was working day and night. He was holding secret planning meetings. He was sketching maps, models, and city plans. He was recording videos of himself explaining the vision of Epcot. Even at age 64, Walt was still more creative than anyone alive. But something was silently happening inside his body. Something dangerous. Something final. Walt Disney had been a heavy smoker for most of his life. Even during studio meetings, he would hold a cigarette in one hand and a pencil in the other. In November 1966, he went to the hospital for a minor neck injury. Doctors took an X-ray and found a dark spot on his left lung. It was lung cancer, and it was already spreading. Walt kept it private. He didn't want anyone to panic. He told very few people. Even some of his team didn't know. He quietly began treatment, but his body was weakening. He kept working anyway. Even from his hospital bed, he had sketches, maps, and papers around him. He had the model of Epcot placed on the ceiling above him, so when he looked up, he could see his city. Roy Disney later said, "Even in his last days, Walt wasn't thinking about death. He was thinking about what the world could become." Walt Disney died on the morning of December 15, 1966, just 10 days after his 65th birthday. The man who changed childhood, cinema, storytelling, and imagination closed his eyes quietly in a hospital room in Los Angeles. No big ceremony, no speeches, no cameras, just silence. The newspapers announced his death with shock. Some headlines read, "Walt Disney, father of Mickey Mouse, dies. The world has lost its greatest dreamer." Even President Lyndon Johnson gave a statement saying, "Walt Disney brought joy to the lives of millions." All over the world, people cried. From children in Tokyo to families in New York, from animators in Italy to tourists in Brazil. Millions of people felt like they had lost someone personal. But Walt Disney didn't truly die, because his dream was now alive inside all of us. After Walt's death, Roy Disney, his older brother, came out of retirement. He had one final mission: finish what Walt started. Roy led the building of Walt's project in Florida. Not just a theme park, but a world. On October 1st, 1971, the gates of Walt Disney World opened. It was 5 times bigger than Disneyland, a full resort, a castle twice the size, lakes, hotels, trains, golf courses, transportation systems. Roy made one powerful decision. He renamed it Walt Disney World, not just Disney World, because he wanted the world to remember who dreamed it first. Then, just 2 months later, Roy Disney passed away too. The 2 brothers who built an empire from pencils and paper were now gone. But they left something behind, something unstoppable. Today, the Walt Disney Company is worth over $180 billion. Owns Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, National Geographic, Hulu, and more. Operates 12 theme parks across 6 countries. Has created over 750 films and shows. Employs more than 200,000 people worldwide. But more than the money, the numbers, or the business, Walt Disney left behind something far greater. He left behind a feeling, a belief that imagination matters, dreams are possible, a pencil can become a castle, a mouse can change the world. Walt Disney was not rich, he was not perfect, he was not lucky. He was just a man who refused to stop dreaming. He was fired, rejected, stolen from, broke, depressed, betrayed, sick. But still, he believed. When the world laughed, he imagined. When the money ended, he borrowed. When his body failed, he kept drawing. And when death came, he left behind an empire of dreams. If you're listening to this right now, here's what you must remember. You don't need to be born lucky. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need one thing: a dream that is bigger than your fear. And if Walt Disney could build all this, with broken pencils, empty pockets, and a heart full of belief, then what's stopping you? If you listened to this story from part 1 to part 4, congratulations. You just learned hundreds of powerful English sentences naturally. That's how you improve. By listening to real stories, told with emotion, and learning with your heart, not just your brain. If this story moved you, if you felt something inside, if it gave you courage, hope, or imagination, then please like, share, and subscribe. Not for me, not for the channel, but because someone out there needs this story today, just like you did. Let them hear it. Let the dream continue. Because in the words of Walt Disney himself, it's kind of fun to do the impossible.